Hi there, I'm Grady Culhane, and welcome to Sunday Journal. I'm joined today by a special guest who is an author talking about her new work that has just come out recently. Do you mind giving us an introduction for our listeners?
Hi, my name is Emily Franklin. I am the author right now of The Lioness of Boston, a new novel about the life of Isabella Steward Garner.
All right, awesome. And thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So we wanted to discuss more about your work in general. You're going to be on Cape soon at several events where you're going to be able to meet some of your readers. But we wanted to highlight this new book that's out. So it's about Isabella Stewart Garner. For people who are probably familiar, she's an American art collector, a philanthropist. Those are probably people are familiar with her role as the founder of the museum that shares her name in Boston. Do you mind talking a little bit more about what the inspiration was from this woman that drew you to her in the first place, that compelled you to write this book?
Absolutely. I think many people obviously are familiar with the extraordinary Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And some people might only know the museum because of the infamous art heist that was there in 1990, and for which there's still a $10 million reward for those paintings that were stolen. But I grew up going to the Gardner Museum, and I was really captivated by the courtyard there. I was captivated by the idea that a museum could have not just paintings and sculptures, but also anything could be considered art. The chairs, the spoons, a desk, a lamp, all of the things that Isabella Stewart Gardner collected over her lifetime. And she was really an extraordinary woman who was ahead of her time in many ways. She was outspoken. She was a defender of art and women and people who society overlooked. She was rejected from high society in Boston when she first moved here. And that rejection really started a little bit of a fire in her belly. And that fire turned into the act of collecting and exposed her to the bigger world outside of Boston, where she was a traveler. And she really felt very strongly about leaving art accessible to the public. And that is why she created the museum. So that is why I wanted to share her life's journey with readers.
All right, awesome. As this is a work of historical fiction, but where that is somewhat of a spectrum. I want to ask you more about what you feel you've taken in terms of liberties versus what stuff is just sort of revealing more truth through fiction, perhaps, or just where you draw the line. Can you talk about that in a little bit more detail?
Absolutely. And there is great truth in fiction, as you're suggesting. Sometimes, authors make up things in order to reveal a greater truth. And so much of this novel, which is very thoroughly researched, and so much of it is true, is real. But anytime I strayed away or embellished something that happened to Isabella or put her in a setting where she might not have actually been, was really in service to that greater truth, trying to build on the life's arc and the character arc that I was writing. And so a good example of that would be the Impressionist exhibit in Paris, which is a place, it really unfolds on the pages of my novel the way that it unfolded in real life. And all of these famous artists, Monet and Manet and Renoir and Degas, all these famous artists that we know so much about were showing there with Bertha Morisot, who was the only woman who showed there. And of the artists I just named, probably the least known. And she was the only woman. And so I wanted to have Isabella Stewart Gardner, who was really a feminist before feminism and a really curious person. I wanted to have them interact on the page. So my choice to have that become a fiction, even though that was a real setting, was exactly to build that character arc for her. And
Is
so, but even in scenes where there's a lot of Boston history in the book. So we see the opening of the Swan Boats, we see the Boston Symphony Orchestra opening, even in scenes where there might be a fiction, a character, for example, who might not have existed in real life. All of the setting is real. So if she's taking the train from Boston to Cambridge, I've mapped out the route, I've researched the train lines that were available, the trams, the carriage wheels, the kinds of horses, the way streetlights worked at that time. So it is very thoroughly researched and very real, even in the times where I'm sort of making it a little bit embellished.
So we talked before off microphone as well. You said you spent 3 years of research and writing, 6 months editing. A lot of work has gone into this. At what point have you started to be walking around and starting to see old architecture of Boston kind of blending with your local reality? What's it like to kind of walk in the shoes of these people, especially if they lived over 100 years ago?
I know it's so exciting actually to be in the Boston area and be able to take a bit of a walking tour through the novel and to see through the characters' eyes, the creation of the public gardens, to walk and find, the Museum of Natural History, which of course is now a Restoration Hardware. So you can go buy a couch instead. But it is really just so amazing to see this history come to life and be able to see, where the African Meeting House, is and has been for hundreds of years, and where Joy Street is, and all of the different places. And Isabella lived, on Beacon Street for so long before she moved to the museum, before she created that place. So it is really, I feel very lucky to be in such a historic place.
And you mentioned already as well, but just the idea of you're highlighting a lot of New England culture. She incorporates she has a lot of conversations with a lot of other local historical figures that have left a tremendous footprint on the Boston area and the New England area at large. Do you mind highlighting some of the other people that you brought in, some of the other characters?
Absolutely. One of the things that was so fun to write about in the Lioness of Boston was the fact that Isabella Steward Garner was friends with so many famous people. So she was very good friends with Henry James, very good friends with John Singer Sargent, who painted a rather infamous portrait of her that was caused quite a scandal in polite society. But she was very good friends with him. And also at that time, the person who was largely responsible for opening up her intellectual curiosity was Charles Eliot Norton. And he was the first professor of art history at Harvard. She meets Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. She just meets all these people, Julia Ward Howe, who, wrote Battle Hymn of the Republic. It becomes her neighbor on Beacon Street. She's just knew everybody and collected people the way that she collected objects and art.
It's certainly a book about someone with a very good eye when it comes to cultural impacts and impact on the world, essentially. But this is not your first piece of work. This is a long string. You've got a lot of poetry and other books under your belt. Do you mind kind of highlighting your journey? I believe that you had your
Absolutely.
first work published in 2003.
Yeah, my first novel came out in 2003. I was doing some work for Car Talk at the time on NPR, but that novel came out. And then since then, I've published a lot of different novels in a lot of different genres. So I've adult and young adult. I've had books in fiction and nonfiction, memoir, cookbook, poetry. But I've really loved this historical novel. And I hope that The Lioness of Boston is sort of the beginning of a new era. It's sort of a funny word, but to more historical fiction. And I have a short story collection that I've finished. So I'm looking forward to whatever is ahead.
That is fantastic. As well, you let me know a while back that you did send out the rights to Hollywood. Do you have any kind of a hope there when it comes to how this is handled?
There's always hope. There's always hope. But it is so fun. Some of the events and readings I've done, people have asked who I wish would play various people. And I can really see it going so many ways. But maybe if we all put our collective, wishing hats on together, we can, have Kate Winslet or, Meryl Streep be interested. But I think, Emily Blunt and John Krasinski, or, we can get a Boston person like Matt Damon interested in the book. But that is always a wishful, fun thing to think about. But I do have to stay focused on the written word and sort of let the Hollywood people do whatever they do out there. But it is a fun idea.
Gotta stay that font of creativity and just keep working at it. But this is very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. As well, I just want to ask you, what is the day in the life of a writer, essentially? You spent 3 years on this. How much is research and homework versus actually sitting down at the keyboard and just bleeding your feelings onto the page? How does it go?
There is a funny art to that. I have 4 kids, and certainly when they were younger, I was writing during nap time or writing while I was trying to feed one kid and hold another on my hip. But now I have more time that they're a bit older. And so my routine is pretty much I get up. I've always treated my creative job as a regular job. So I never sort of treated it as I need to be inspired to work or I have to have just the right setting. I can pretty much write anywhere. But I wake up and I have my coffee and I do my exercise and then I sit down and I write for several hours. I pretty much am an early to bed, early to rise, person. So I'm a morning worker by around 3:34 in the afternoon, my brain starts to power down a little bit and go into nap mode. So I write every day, and in terms of the research versus the writing, I can tell you that for this next novel that I'm working on, I'm in the beginnings of the research phase, which is trying to sort of test out the waters, and I'm usually researching for a bulk of the day and then just starting to write. And then as the research gets deeper and deeper, the characters begin to make themselves known to me. The plot begins to make itself known. So I'm taking notes, I'm finding the voices of the characters and starting to work on those. And pretty soon, where the research was up here and the writing was down there, they start to trade places, and I start to ease off of the research. But I'm not there yet with this new book. But with the Lioness of Boston, once I'm waking up in the night and sort of having to write things down, I know that I need to really just sit down and power through.
Did you always know that you wanted to be a writer ever since you were young?
Ever since I was young, I think I wrote my first poem when I was 4. But I was really torn between writing and medical school, and chose writing, figuring that I could write about medicine and science, which I do frequently. But it would be harder to be a physician and do the kind of writing that I do.
So as well, one of the reasons why we wanted to chat with you is because you are going to be on Cape essentially as part of the celebration of this book launching. Do you mind kind of highlighting some of the places that you're looking forward to, how it's going to feel to be on Cape, and some of those upcoming events related to meeting people, some of your fans? But as well, you also mentioned that you do a couple of book groups through Zoom, which I thought was such an interesting idea. If you wanted to talk a little bit more about that first,
I
Zoom
do.
meets.
Yeah, so I'm always happy to Zoom into book groups. I think it's so fun for me to connect with readers, and I think it's fun, from what I hear, to have an author come and visit after you've read the book. So I encourage anyone listening who's in a book group, if you select the book and read it and reach out to me on my author website, which is emilyfranklin.com, you can try and set up a Zoom with me. And we can discuss the book, and I can answer any questions, which is really fun. My first event on the Cape is May 23rd. I'm in Sandwich at the Town Hall, which is very exciting for me. And then I'm in Weymouth after that. Then I'm in, let's see, what other ones do I have? Wareham and Westport, Mass, and Chatham, Mass, and in Provincetown and Duxbury.
All right, awesome. Chatham and Provincetown are going to be out in my neck of the woods. Fantastic. Please enjoy the salt air and the lovely water as it starts to get a little bit warmer. But thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight for our listeners while I still have you, related to this book, related to the creative process in general, or just what you're hoping for with your next project?
Well, I'm just hoping that many readers continue to find the Lioness of Boston and really can connect with Isabella Steward Garner, both as a sort of cultural icon and a real Boston icon. She is a woman who is known so much in Boston, known a bit less in the rest of the world, but certainly deserves her place in history. And hopefully people will come and find her in my book.
That is awesome. So sorry, actually, one last question. That is, if there is one major takeaway or theme that someone can get from this book, the audience member, that you could just beam into their head if they're going to be readers for you, what would that be? What would be the major message that you want to send?
The major message is we all have a life's purpose, and we just need to find it. And we all have our people. We need to find them too.
All right, awesome. Emily, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. This has been Sunday Journal. I'm Grady Culhane.
Thanks so much.